Okay, so my question was, for a long time, many years ago, when I just started my work and my studies on resilience. The story goes like this. I came to the north of Israel in 1979, young psychologist, and I was hoping to work mostly with clinical psychology. But when I was looking around and I was looking for what's going on with our clients, it was very interesting because most of the clients who came to the clinic, of course, were describing various emotional and other problems, but they always said it's only as a result of the katyushas, you know, these small rockets. And so I realized that from this kind of clientele, I will not learn enough, because what I saw around was a group of members of this community going to school, going to work, leaving. And I said to myself, how come what I studied in psychology, that people who live under extreme stress will probably suffer from PTSD? And at the end of the day, I saw people with PTSD, but most people were working, were functioning, were living. And that's led me to my first study of what helps people. I just went out to the field and asked 300 children and 400 adults to share with me what is helping them to cope with the situation. In fact, the term resilience was not a very common word at that time. It was mostly methodology. But of course, coping was the word that we were looking into. And later on in this lecture, I will share with you what are the things that we have found. But let me start with a very, very important question to me. And I would say, how come a very wretched or helpless or hopeless creature that came to this world without hair, fur, or armor, without claws or teeth or protection or ability to run, practically devoid of any ability to defend itself, became the ruler of this planet? And this question keeps on in my mind for years. And I was asking myself, what did I miss in my studies that I wasn't learning about what makes us able to function, able to survive? And in fact, even in the 21st century, as we know, people are suffering, people are working through difficulties. But what is more important is that still in the 21st century, newborns are born in the same way that I described here, without claws or teeth or anything to protect them, without the ability to find food. So this, I would say, dependency and needy is kind of something that, despite the many, many years since 60,000 years ago, where Homo sapiens appeared in Africa, that we still are very, very, I would say, kind of a creature that needs protection and needs other people. At the same time, we need to remember that other mammals are very quickly able to find food, to move, to find shelter, etc., etc. So it is still a very interesting question. And my answer, of course, is there is something special in the human being that I tried to study, and I will share it with you. And what should I comment on? I would like to comment on several questions, but I will do it as quickly as I can. Is the human being the stronger of its kind? That's the apes. Is it the only who stood up straight? Are we the only one with thumb that converges toward the forearm? Are we the only being that builds tools? And it is only human that communicates in sounds and signs. To all these questions, you will find that we are not the only one. So first of all, as you can see, gorilla is far stronger and bigger than man. And of course, orangutan is also stronger. So amongst the apes, definitely we're not the strongest. Even if we compare it to the path of evolution, we can see that the guy that was just side by side to us, so to speak, the Neanderthal man, is much stronger than the Homo sapiens sapiens. So again, even in our own kind, we are not the strongest. And if we move on, we can see that we are not the only one that has our thumb in front of our hand, our palm. So we are not the only one that can grasp and hold things. And of course, we are not the only one that can use tools. So, and of course, also on communication, of course, we know that some birds and of course, dolphins do communicate. So what makes us so special that prepared us to become the one, I would say, species that has conquered, so to speak, this planet, of course, making so much trouble and so much damage, but this is for another lecture. So my question is, what is so special about the Homo sapiens sapiens? And I would say it's our ability to think future, to speak future, and not just the immediate future, but the far, far away future. But of course, this future is also causing us a lot of difficulties, because when we understand that we have future, we human beings also know that there is an end to each and every one of us, and that we are finite. And that, of course, creates a lot of fear and a lot of distress to us. And we need to cope with that, because that's a major question. So how do we make it and how do we cope with this very, very early understanding of our vulnerability? And let me say that from research, both of ours and others, children at the age of 3, and I'm sure also now in Ukraine you find it, that very early on, children are of a very young age are sharing and talking about life and death. Of course, according to psychology, as you know, the time that this concept of death is matured is around the age of 7 and 9. But anyway, once it is matured, once the human being understands that death is not just happen to old people or to animals, but also to them and to their loved ones, this is a different approach, a different, I would say, concept and awareness that is, in a way, leading us to either being very frightened, or, as we know, the future is also a place for our hopes and our dreams. So knowing we are finite is, of course, very, very distressful. But usually what we do is we're going like the 3 apes or the 3 monkeys. We don't want to hear about it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to see that. So basically, that's usually what we do when we need to address the main, I would say, the most important question of our life. And how do we do it? Yes, we go with this kind of a smoke that we are covering or hovering above our heads. So not to be in touch with it. But as in Ukraine and as in Israel, in recent years, we cannot avoid this question. This question is on the table all the time, the question of life and death, and the question of survival and coping. So what are we doing usually? We're imagining that we have kind of a contract with the Lord. And that's something that we found to be a very important, just a second, I'll try to close the window here. We found in some of our studies that people tend to believe that if they just do the right things will happen to them, especially based on Janov Bullman's studies on basic assumption of me and world. We found out that, yes, people believe that if they will just do the right things will happen to them, good things will happen to them. And the main assumption is that the world is just, logic, and fair. And if you do the right things, good things will prevail. So is it something that is contradicting or countering our fears of annihilation, of death? Now, one thing that we found out that is very, very important to the human being, and as early as I would say the beginning of humankind on this planet, especially if we're talking about the Homo sapiens sapiens, that for some reason developed their ability to talk and to tell stories, we found that stories is one of the ways that we make sense. I would say even more specifically, storytelling is the way that from the beginning of history, and as you probably aware, the world history is his story, or I should say even her story. It should be their story. But anyway, that in the beginnings of history, as from the beginning of history, human beings were telling stories to calm their fears. We just had for you the Christmas and for us Hanukkah, and some people don't even know that anthropologists believe that Hanukkah and Christmas and Diwali and many light festivals in the middle of the winter is probably a reminder or a remains of old traditions or old fears that were in the past when the winter came in and there was no much sun, and there were many days without any light, and of course the trees didn't bear fruits, and human beings were very frightened. And you can see almost in every culture in the world stories about how human beings were trying to bring back light. So there are African stories about the frog that swallowed the sun, and all the animals came to beg for the sun, and the frog didn't want to give it to them until the monkey came and made jokes, and then the frog started laughing, and again sun came back. And one of the ideas that anthropologists suggest is that it is not an incident, or that there is a reason why all these light festivals happen in the middle of the winter. Because in the old days, human beings believed that if they will light a fire, they will call back the sun to return. Because without sun, they realized there won't be any life on this planet. So storytelling in the past were dealing mostly with natural powers, and later on with gods all over, of all kinds, etc. And of course, in our times, we tell the same way, but we use a scientific type of telling. And excuse me for saying it, but statistics is another kind of storytelling, because it's a way to calm our fears by trying to control sometimes the uncontrollable, but giving it a statistical, so to speak, a scientific story that says if it is 1 to 1 million, it's not you. But if you are the 1 million, of course, it is a different story. Now, the ability to transcend beyond reality, the ability to use fantasy is one of the strongest, I would say, aspects of our ability to think future, to imagine, and to be playful. So what we actually realized is that when we tell our own stories, and when we are recounting our troubles as well as our good stories or good happenings or things that happen to us and we are happy about, we are using what we call psycholinguistic structures. By that, we actually found that people coming from the same situation tell you the stories, of course, in different ways. And what we realized when we started to ask people what helps you, we have come to kind of a model that is dividing it to 6 main channels, but not mutually excluding, but they are also interrelating. So what we called it was the basic pH. The basic pH is the way we listen to stories. But why do you call it basic pH? As you can see from this slide, we wanted very much to think about what is health. And in our mind, the health is basically the balance between acidity and alkaline. And so that's why we call it basic pH. But what does it stand for? I will tell you right now. So we call it the integrative model of basic pH. That is basically a change in perspective. Coming from our studies in the north of Israel with people who have been for years under shelling, and also by watching lots of Jewish Holocaust survivors, we realized that there is so much more to what we think when we look at pathology, and we are actually changing our perspective from why people fail to how people survive. Meaningly, we saw that so many people who have been through difficulties, both in the past and in the present, majority are making it. Yes, they have sadness, they have fear, they have troubles, they have all sorts of emotions, but that's not, I would say, that's not an accident. That's part of life, to have reactions to something that happened in your life, such a war or a terrorist attack or a car accident or an ailment. So basically, what we said is not that of course, it's very interesting to study how and why people fail. But again, if you look from a developmental psychology or development in general point of view, and you look at kids, how they start to walk, they don't walk immediately. They fall and rise, they fall and rise, and then they balance themselves and they learn how to walk. And I believe that the miracle is not how we fall, because of course, the gravity, of course, the power of gravity always will pull us down. The question is, how did we raise up, or how do we raise up after a problem, after a trouble? So sadness, sorrow, pain, in my mind, is not an accident in life. It's part of life. Of course, there is also joy and happiness. But we need to remember that most people who have been exposed to traumatic incidents will recover in different times, but I would say about 80% will make it. Although you will hear other experts who will tell you that much more will suffer. Again, it depends on the situation. Of course, if you have been personally exposed to atrocities and to murder and to rape of your family or to killing of your family, you are unfortunately expected to suffer from severe PTSD. But I would say the vast majority of people are not exposed directly to these horrendous situations. Now, the question of how people survive is not very, very, I would say, old, so to speak. Some of the terms that are used are resiliency, salutogenesis, etc. And of course, this is versus the concept that we look at people and we actually try to understand what is wrong with them. And of course, this system wants to ask, but how do they make it? Because all of us are facing difficulties in this life. We all are facing difficulties managing things. Even if I'm not exposed like you and us to war, we human beings are struggling and trying to make their way through troubles throughout their life and develop their coping abilities. So, in fact, I was talking about the miracle of survival. On the one hand, the most vulnerable creature on this planet, and at the same time, the only one that exists in any weather or climate ages and ages ago, both in the Sahara Desert and, of course, in Alaska. So the main question, or the other question, is what is the benefit of looking for resiliency? And we believe, and that's something that we have found some 40 years ago, that if we know how individuals, groups, or communities survive or make it through difficulties, if we learn the code of making it through difficulties, we can basically teach those who are suffering. We can learn the code of survival, minimize pathology, and help the recovery process. But what is resiliency in our terms? That is probably one of the kind of resiliency when this guy is making a jump board when his house is on flood, and his wife says he always look on the bright side of things. And that's a kind of way to define for some people what is resilience. But I would say that resiliency is the ability to recover despite periodical setbacks or difficulties by oneself or with the help of others. So you see that the main thing is the term recover, or sometimes people use the term heal. And because when we are looking at trauma from a medical point of view, and as we all know, the most common fractures are fractures of the arm or fractures of the leg. And we know that it takes time for it to heal. And there are two things that I want to mention here. One, that the plaster of Paris, or whatever you call the cover of the broken limb, is not really making anything but giving the fractured bones the conditions to heal. And no one will tell you that there is any penetration of calcium from the plaster of Paris to the bones. It is the way to help a fracture, a traumatic appearance, to recover. And that's usually what we have to think about, because we always look around and ask ourselves, is there a need immediately for some very, very, I would say, intensive intervention? And I would say, look around you and see that in most cases, at least from my knowledge, and I know that there are doctors in this room, so I believe they may correct me, but not more than 6-7% of people who have fractured bones in their arms will go for plating. Most people will satisfy with the plaster of Paris. And thereafter, after 6 weeks, in usual cases, these will be removed, and slowly, slowly, they will recover. What is very important is that when weather change or when they have flu, this fracture might remind them, might give them a sense of pain. But that is not to say that they can't continue and make it and cope with life. So what we learn from it is that the ability to recover is something that we have to invest our understanding now, our studies. So it is not a new concept altogether. On the one hand, we can say that in the 70s, basically, there were several attempts to understand how people make it. So the terms that were coined is resiliency, hardiness, learned resourcefulness, self-efficacy, and stress inoculation. There were many concepts that were quite recently devised or developed to describe this phenomenon. But what have we found? So let me take 2 minutes to tell you this very special story. Now, can you think about 1979 coming in 700 answers, but most people are giving us more than 1 or 2 answers. That means thousands of answers are coming in, people answering one simple question: what helps you? And no computer, no natural language processing model. So we had to use our brains, and we sat for hours and hours and hours, and we slowly developed a concept that we call the integrative model of coping and resilience. Now, I need to tell you one thing, and maybe it will repeat itself. Why do we call it coping and resiliency? Because resilience is a definition, but it doesn't tell you how people making it. It just gives you a general idea of the ability to recover. But how do you recover? So the coping is basically the keys to understand individual ways to resilience, to be resilient. And we think that resilience is like any other muscle. You have been born with it, And if you don't activate it, if you don't function, if you don't use it when you will need it like any other muscle, it won't be ready for you. So we think that it is a born ability of human beings. Some develop it more, some develop it less, but the maintenance of it, like any other muscle, is very, very important. So what have we found? We call it basic PH. B actually stands for belief, self, values, and basically we are talking about Maslow and about Viktor Frankl here. Emotions basically is the affective mode, and here we rely on Freud and later on Rogers. Social, that is others and organization, and we are going to theoreticians like Erickson and Adler. And imagination, we are looking into many very known one, but the one that originally we were looking into is de Bono. And then for the cognitive part, we're talking about Beck and Ellis and others, cognitive theoreticians. And for the PH, of course, we're talking about earlier time, about Pavlov and Watson. And today, of course, there are many, many more models of the connection between body and mind. Now, some people ask us, in a way, what you're showing or what we're showing is that we believe that different people behave, of course, and react in different ways, although there are commonalities for sure. I mean, I will talk about it, that in our, the Western culture is very cognitive oriented, but altogether, different people are using different channels, different ways, either because they have been born with this kind of trend or tendency, or because they born to this family with this kind of way of living, or throughout their education or the maturation, they absorb various modes of coping. Now, as I said before, coping, the way resilience manifests itself, does the way people make up their story, can tell us how they cope. And here, let me first of all tell you what we found in the very beginning of our stories, or our studies. We found that in the belief system, people shared with us that they use their belief, that is their religious belief, but not only, it could be also their ideology or values, hope, of course. People were talking about hope, about self-esteem. Some people were talking about the psychophilosophy. That means they have kind of a tendency to look at things from a philosophical way. Of course, we found here spiritualism, search for meaning, religion, as I said before, and mysticism. Why do we count all of them together? Because they are all coming under this search for meaning, or I would say people who are saying that what helps them is to find something bigger than them, or sometimes in themselves, that tells them you can make it. And we just, of course, quote Viktor Frankl here, when you have meaning, you can suffer everything. Basically, it is a paraphrase of his that he used of Nietzsche. Okay, and what does it mean in practice? The second channel, of course, is the affective mode. Here, people are telling us the way I cope the best is by sharing emotions and feelings, by calling someone, by writing for myself a self-diary, by drawing, sometimes expressing my emotions directly or indirectly. That means we don't think that only, I would say, nice and so to speak, positive feelings are what people share when they are facing difficulties. It could be also very, very aggressive and unpleasant emotions that they take out of their soul, so to speak. But that's their way to cope, and that's very, very important to say that emotion is one of the channels, unfortunately, or I don't know if it is unfortunately, but I would say truly psychology put a lot of emphasis on emotional channel of coping by saying that if you have been through trouble, you need to share your emotions, or what was known in the past to be ventilation. And I can tell you that in most studies, emotion as itself never, in my studies of course, never appeared to be a sole channel. It was always combined with another one that I will, or another two others, like the social and the imagination, which we'll come to in a minute. Now, the social channel that people were sharing with us, where people were saying, what helps me is friends, family, meaningful others, taking a role in a situation, part of an organization or a system, and being able to use other, I would say, helpers or professionals to give me advice and direct me. So they are much more into what we may call networking, or working within a group, family, friends, and taking a role. And by that, finding that they are responsible for what happened and not passive. The imaginative part, of course, unfortunately, for years and years, were looked as the weaker ones, those who are running away from the situation, who are diverting their attention, who are not connected to reality. But again, in our studies, we found that this is also one of the challenges of coping. Imagination is intuition, fantasy, humor, creativity, ability to improvise, diversion of attention, because sometimes watching again and again, for instance, the news is not helping them. They don't want any more of that. They want to watch a film or read a book, or divert their attention by using a video game. So, and of course, practically, they are also creative, and they are using all sorts of items or products from arts and crafts. So imagination is almost one before the last. The fifth channel that we found is cognition. Cognition, meaningly that people are telling us, we are very realistic, I'm very logic, I am mostly using planning, learning, I process information, I need data, I do a preference order, I'm looking for priorities and alternatives, and I use self-talk. Now, self-talk, nowadays when people are walking in the street and talking with their earphones, you might say this is kind of a self-talk, but they usually talk to someone else. Self-talk is when a person is giving himself or herself instructions like do that, do this, do that, and start with that, don't worry, take a deep breath. These are kind of self-talk, and we find out that this is also very helpful in the cognitive type group. Lastly, but not least, of course, is the physiological people, those that we can call them also the somatics, or as we call them, the physiology. These are people who are mostly expressing themselves through action, through doing things, sometimes doing things directly to cope with the situation, and sometimes doing things just for the sake of doing, like smoking, like sports, like relaxing, like sex. And sometimes, of course, they are doing something practical. They will solve the problem, they will put down the fire, they will make a very clear space, safe space for the family, etc. But these people can also use the relaxing side. So it's not only the active, but also the relaxing. That means they can do meditation and yoga and Tai Chi and daydreaming in a way through what we call relaxation through guided imagery. They would walk in the woods. They would like to swim. They would like to do sports. All of these activities is part of the PH. And also using alcohol and using drugs. We don't like it, but this is their way to meet the challenges of the situation. So basically what we say is that when we are listening to the stories or the accounts of our clients, we try to not analyze what do they mean, or what do they want from me, or what is their hidden agenda, but how do they actually tell the stories? Now, I would like to give you a very simple, two simple examples. The first one will come from, let's say, clinical psychology. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the diagnosis and the symptoms of depression. And when we look at the ICD or the DSM, it's very clear what we are looking for. But then when we meet the client, they will have their own way to discover it. So you will have people who will tell you that there is no hope, that they never had luck, that their life was always full of misery. So these are the belief system people. The emotional people will tell you, I'm so lonely, I'm so sad, I'm so desperate. Okay? The social people will tell you, I'm so alone, no one is coming, no one is interested in me. Where are everyone? Why am I so alone? The imaginative person will tell you, I don't know, but it feels like I'm falling into this darkness. I'm like a tree in a storm. All my branches are broken. They will use metaphor as part of their imaginative coping mode. The cognitive one will talk about what we call negative cognitions. Everything is bad. Nothing is going to work. There is no way out of this loop. And everyone, of course, is not understanding because they are the only one that can understand what's going on. And of course, the physiological one will tell you about the depression through pain, lots of appetite, lots of aches, and I would say sometimes feeling weak, etc., etc. So why did I give that to you? Because once we are listening to the way a person tells us a story, and again, I should say that people are not using only one channel. Suppose the client, the depressive client, is telling you that they are very, very lonely and that they are very depressed and they are very sad and they don't believe there is any chance. Now, when we look at their story, we will go through the book and we'll tell ourselves they are depressed. But in fact, if you want to communicate with that person, we have to go to their channel in order to convey to them that we have heard them. So we need to talk with that person. Let's say what we shouldn't do. We shouldn't give them instructions because this is not what helps them right now. They know the instructions, but they don't believe in what's going on. If you start asking them about what they imagine, they will tell you they don't know what they imagine. They just feel very, very bad. So what I'm actually saying, if we want to bridge over to a person, if we listen to the way they tell the story, we can actually find the bridge to make contact with them, and especially when they are very, very, I would say, affected, depressed, frightened, traumatized, etc. Because what we learn is that people are trying to tell stories. You remember what I told you about telling stories? We need to tell our story. So the story might be a physical story, like being very, very shy or withdrawn or not communicating, but that means that the body is telling us the story. So what we actually train our therapist and interventionist is to see or to put on their ears these, I would call it, these filters, and not only ask themselves, what is the problem, but how does this person share with me their problems? Maybe this will be the way to bridge to them. And basically this model, as of course, was built on scanning of resiliency research. I will be happy to send you one of the reviews that we did. We have been doing lots of research ourselves, and we then, of course, tried to build protocols and intervention models and systems to see if this is really working. And what is very important is that we did it all the time with the field and tried it out in the real world, not just in the laboratory. And of course, we did evaluations and studies. And there is a whole book that was published in 2013 in England called The Basic PH Theory and Practice. That shares about 30-something years of protocols, of studies, and of projects based on this model. And just to show you what we saw in times of crisis, basically under shelling in the north. That's an old study from 14 years ago. But what we saw that in the beginning, as you can see, there was a kind of decline in activating people's coping modes. But the longer the stress, what happened is that the belief system in this specific community was the one that kind of grew up and grew up and grew up. So the more they were under stress, the more days they were under shelling, the more they were activating their belief system. And as you can see also, for instance, in this case, the imagination one is not that developed. The social one is going through the system, staying almost the same, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into all these details. I will just share with you another study that was done on displaced people. And what we found there, that the social, cognitive, and physiology coping resources are the most frequently mobilized by this group. Children and adults mobilize more coping resources when the intensity of stress reaction is higher. Girls mobilize the affective mode and the social coping resource more than boys. Boys have a nearly significant tendency to mobilize the imagination resources more than girls. And altogether, boys have a tendency to mobilize more the cognitive and the physiological coping resources than girls. And this is just to show you one of the slides of that study on the displaced people. And there are many other things that we can talk about, but we need to say that no correlation was found between children age and the mobilization of coping resources, which we were quite surprised because we believe that younger kids might use more the imagination. Residents who experience more emotional distress reaction mobilize more the affective and the cognitive and the physiological coping resources in order to cope with their own stress. That is also part of this big study that we did. And there was another follow-up after 5 months. It means after they came back to their hometowns. And the most significant fading away of stress reaction was found with the emotional and the physiological stress reaction, which were the most intensive at the time of the operation. That means that a higher level of emotional stress reaction leads to more intensive mobilization of the emotional, physiological, and cognitive resources. And again, females who reported more emotional stress reaction mobilized affective coping resources, expressing their feeling and imagination and physiological activities in order to cope. Male who report more emotional stress reaction mobilize the cognitive coping resources. Children who express more anxiety mobilize the physiological and activities coping resources to overcome their fears. And differences between children and adults, where while adults mobilize the affect and cognitive and physiological coping resources in a high level of stress reaction, children depend more on the physiological one and on the active, which is sport, games, and trips. And there are so many other findings. I think we'll have one or two more. A positive and significant correlation was found between the social coping resources in the affective one. That means that people who tend to use the social aspect also are good in sharing emotion. This finding is true both for adults and children, male and female. Children, negative correlation was found between the affect, social coping resources and the imagination one. That means those kids who are using more interpersonal and sharing of feelings with friends are using less their imagination, okay? And those exposed to longest to the shelling and who chose not to evacuate, mobilize their beliefs and values coping resources more than others, which means those who stayed behind and never left the town, though it was under bombardment for 30 days, she found in this study that what actually helped them the most is their belief and their values that help them to cope with the situation and stay behind. Two more things that I would like to share with you, although the time is really passing quickly, is that you can train professionals to teach that. And this study was done on the European School Psychologist Training for Crisis. And what we found is that what was the second most contributing concept or method that they learned was the assessing of the personal coping, which is part of what we developed. We developed assessment tools, and of course also the model itself. And we did a very, very big training in Sri Lanka following the tsunami of December 2004, and we worked there from 2005 until 2007. And in 2011, we did a follow-up to see what happened with what we trained them. So to see if there is any efficacy to our training, and that there is there is something that stays behind after our training. So altogether, 5 years after the original training, how many trainees did you have? And you can see that a big number of them had over 2,000 trainees. That means these people not only studied how to work with our models, but also got to many people. And again, when we asked them what are the main things that you used, again, there are many models that we taught them, but again, basic PH was one of the top three, and one of the assessment tools for children called 6-part storytelling was again one of the highest on the list. So I would say that this in a way will cover what I wanted to tell you, and I would love to have questions from you right now if you have time. If not, we'll just stop here.
Thank you so much, dear Professor.
But I don't hear you. That's the problem. So
I would like to say
somehow write your questions and I will answer them.
Right question.
Yeah.
Нас не слышат?
Do you hear me, Professor? Do you hear me?
For some reason, I don't hear you.
Don't hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Что делать?
So whoever wants to ask a question, please write it in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll try.
The chat.
Okay. Yes. Write it down. Yes.
Почему нас не слышно? А что, write the chat?
Да.
Ну, давайте напишем тогда в чат.
Мы уйдем сейчас с экрана. Давайте дадим. Ну, пусть напишут, да. Такой, ну, первый, давайте хотя бы. Микрофон выключи.
Maybe whilst we are waiting, I will give you another example from my work in ERs. Imagine you have a group of people coming from a not very serious accident, but coming to your ER. Now, sometimes you will find that they are describing their experience in different ways. For instance, there will be the guy who says that today at 7:55 I left my house at King Street and I was running with my car with two colleagues, and at Queen Street a old Peugeot came and they were running too quickly and they ran into me, and I believe they were running about 50 kilometers an hour. This is the cognitive guy. They will always give you details. The next person who comes will say, oh my God, I'm so afraid, I'm so scared, it was so terrible, and they will be, of course, the emotional, coming from the same event. And the social guy will say, yes, this morning I came in with the car with Joe and with Dora and with Bianca, and we saw on the way Richie, but we didn't have time. And then, of course, we continued to go to work together. And on the crossroad, there was this accident. And you won't believe who was the driver in the other car. He was the next door neighbor of my aunt. So they will describe the situation mostly from the relationship, the social part. And of course, there will be those who come to the ER and will talk mostly on the pain, on the headache, on the backache, on nausea, etc. And there will be those who will say, oh, don't worry about it, this is my day, this is my worst day, I knew that it will be my worst day, I always have bad days. There, of course, will be the belief system guy, etc., etc., etc. What we actually try to say is that people will use more than one channel, but when they come to you, they will tell you the story because we are basically the storytelling animal. So now I can see the question. I will read it to you. This horror, not so quickly. Okay, hold on. Okay. Just a second. Wait for your next question because the screen is running, so I need to see that. So just a second. Okay, now. So the question is, what is the difference between resilience and resistance? Okay. Resistance and resilience are concepts that Bonanno was looking into, and he says that resistance is those who not affected altogether. In his studies, it's about 50% of people who will be exposed to any difficulty, trauma, event, and they will not be affected so much, and they will be able to continue very quickly to resume and go on working. So we call them the resistance ones. The resilience is those who will, as I showed you in the slide about how we measure the coping over time, that in the beginning there will be a decline in their coping, and then they will mobilize their coping resources. I believe that a metaphor that can work here for you, again, as doctors, is the immune system. As you know, when there is an invasion of a alien element to our body, there is a time where the body is attacked, and then the body reacts with the T cells. So I would say that in that respect, resilience is almost the same. So the more the invasion of the infection comes in, the more the body will mobilize its defense mechanism. So that's what we see. So there is a decline, and then there is a elevation. And of course, both in physiology and in psychology, most people will recover. We tend to give medications very quickly, but we know that most viruses will disappear in their own way without us giving antibiotics or anything like that. So the body will recover, the mind will recover in most people, and that's resilience, the decline and then the ability to recover. Whereas resistance is when you are standing still, and as Bonanno says, it's about 50% of the population. In some studies, it's even more. Okay, the emphasis on cognitive processes in basically is sufficient to overcome deep emotional trauma. What are the limitations of basic PH? Basic PH, in my lecture today, is a model of understanding the resilience or the abilities of people, their ability to make it. And you see, one of the hindrance of intervention in psychology and therapy is that we focus on symptoms and we focus on what is not working or what is the pathology of people. And what we actually tell you, combine within your interview your ability to ask yourself through what the client is saying, and of course from the way you understand, as I just gave you a brief understanding of the process, what are the resources, what are the strengths of that person. We come from a very, I would say, maybe I should say it's a humanistic approach or whatever, that basically everyone would like to be healthy. Very, very few people don't want to recover. So we want also to lay our hand to their ability. Now, the model is not cognitive. The model is psycholinguistic. That means we trace different channels, and with the emotional person, we'll work with emotions. And with the imaginative person, we'll work with imagination and playfulness and creativity. The model is helping you, using, of course, your brain, that's the cognitive apparatus, to understand which channel is projecting to you or sent to you or said to you or told you. But it's not to say that you only will work as a reaction with cognitive. You will not work with cognitive methods with a very emotional, imaginative and spiritual person. It won't work to you. You can speak to the wall and you won't get through. So the model, the basic pitch is a map for you as a therapist. It's not a solution. The solution or the ideas come from you understanding what are the ways the client is meeting the world, is trying to communicate to you what have happened to them. Okay, let's see what's next here. Just a second. Many people in both Ukraine and Israel are experiencing stress. Despite the ongoing situation in Ukraine, we still have foreign students studying here. That's very good. What recommendations can you provide to help them prevent or reduce the stress they are facing? Well, of course, first of all, I'm very happy to know that you have foreign students. That means that both them and you are very resilient, because otherwise they wouldn't come. Now, I think that the model actually suggests that whatever program you build for prevention, take it through, I would say, the screen of the basic PH. That means ask yourself, is my program dealing with values, with spiritualism, with looking for meaning? Is my program for these students is using ability to identify my emotions, develop my ability to share emotions, etc.? Is my program is dealing with interpersonal activities, group activities, giving people a role? Is my program using also expressive modes, like using arts or using play or using music? Is my program is giving information? Is my program giving guidelines? Is my program giving them direction where and what to do in such and such situation? And PH, is my program teaching them health behavior? Is my program teaching them skills of relaxation, skills of grounding, etc., etc.? So the question here is not what am I suggesting, is your program multidimensional or just one channel, that most programs are using 3 channels. They're using cognitive, they're sometimes using social, interpersonal, and sometimes also physiology, that is relaxation. But people have much more than all these 3 channels. So this is my answer here. Are there any scientific studies that explains the biological foundations of resilience? Not on humans as far as I know, but there are studies on animals, and we need to admit there are also there is also resilience within animals. That guy decided to experience all the emotions. Okay, I don't know what is that. How do you think current military operations will affect the level of resilience of the younger generations and the coping mechanism in the future? Oh God. Okay. I didn't tell you that I'm in this field for almost 50 years, and I worked in Sarajevo, and I worked in Ireland, and I worked in many places where aggression was a common behavior of the adults group. And what we learned is that when there is war, a young generation learn that aggression and I would say, yes, aggressive behavior is the way to solve problems. And I think this is a problem that you see and will see, and we see and will see in our countries. Because what happened when the older generation are breaking the taboo of using aggression, that means killing and being killed, etc., and there is so much death and grief and bereavement, younger people may take it as a permission to behave viciously, violently. And there are many studies that shows the correlation between wars and level of violence within the youngest generation. So this is one thing. And the question, of course, is what will the education system, how will the nation in general will try to interpret what have happened to it? Right now in Israel, we're going through a very, very strong, I would say, nationalistic wave. And of course, the answer is something, if there is power against you, you need more power. If there is aggression against you, you need more aggression and violence. And the problem is that young children don't really differentiate, or children, the young generation don't really differentiate between a, let's say, designed enemy, sorry for my English, then their peer in the class or the next door neighbor. And that's what worries us. You know something that we know about the brain, that the brain is wired to assess signs of stress and threat within 1 or 2 milliseconds. It is wired to identify neutral reaction in something like 5 to 7 milliseconds, and to identify signs of love and care in about 7-9 milliseconds. The problem with people who lives under constant war and fear is that they don't give their brain the chance to move beyond the 1 or 2 milliseconds. Everything activate them to react either aggressively or react in fighting or fight or flight, sometimes freeze. Do you think the current generation of children, that's what you just said. In our research in Ukraine during the war, we found the predominance of the COG. Yes, of course. First of all, you are the offsprings of the communist system, which was very, very scientific and cognitive. So the families have been through the system, and the system was very much into cognition. That is not to say that there is no very, very amazing art, amazing music performance in your country. But yes, the Western system in general mostly support and develop and appreciate what I called being grounded, being sober, being cognitive, being realistic. That's what we get a lot of reward and support for. But once you start to go beyond this kind of questions and try and see which other channels are available, because we know that one of the main things of resilience is flexibility. And flexibility means that you need to use not only your cognitive apparatus, but also your physiological apparatus, your imagination and your emotion, etc., etc. So yes, I can say that also in our studies, cognition is still very, very strong. And I should say another thing, that it's not a bad thing. It's showing that people are having a what we call sense of reality, which is very important. But at the same time, I would very much work on expanding their ways of meeting challenges, because we know that at the end of the day, if you are single channel, you're bound to find situation in life that it won't help you. You can't just do it more and more, what we call in psychology, more of the same. Okay, the last one is, unfortunately, we couldn't see your presentation. Wow, the slides didn't change? Oh my God, so I was assuming it was working? You're saying to me it's not. Okay, what I will do then, I will send it to you and you will see the slides without me, okay?
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I was so happy that it started to work and now I can see it didn't. All right. So anyway, I thank you for your participation, and I would just say that this is what we could do, and I'm very sad about the technical problems, but that's the 21st century. You are very much bound and connected to technology, and then sometimes it fails. So thank you very much for your attention, and maybe sometimes else we could have a better communication and you will see my slides, because I was sure that my slides were passing. Anyway, thank you very much.
Окей. Шановні колеги, якщо ви мене чуєте, сьогодні ми мали унікальну можливість почути дуже цікаву і дуже корисну лекцію професора Мулі Лахада. І він пообіцяв нам надіслати свої слайди, і ми обов'язково розмістимо їх, щоб ви з ними ознайомилися. Це видатна людина, відома на усьому світі, яка більше 30 років займається проблемами резильєнтності, і він є автором унікальної методики Basic PH, про яку він сьогодні мав можливість нам розповісти, але деякі технічні причини, деякі технічні негаразди не дозволили нам у повній мірі насолодитися цією лекцією. Але ми сподіваємося, що ми продовжимо співпрацю і кооперацію з Мулі Лахадом. Крім того, я хочу зауважити ще те, що Мулі Лахад співпрацює з Україною у рамках програми першої леді, програми ментального здоров'я «Ти як?». І він приймає участь у підкастах, і він ділиться своїми наробками і методиками, і це дуже віддана і дуже така поважна людина, яку ми сьогодні з вами почули. І я хочу всім подякувати за увагу, за вашу таку витримку, що ми без лекцій, без слайдів таки залишилися і почули цю унікальну лекцію. Я всім бажаю мирного вечора, мирного неба і на все до наступних зустрічей. Я слухаю. Слухаємо вас. Все. На все добре, шановні колеги. Дякую.
Дякуємо, до побачення.
До побачення.
До побачення.
Дякую, до побачення.